Back tonight, Tone in Focus, Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405. In his final installment of the State Capture Inquiry Report, Commission Chairperson Raymond Zondo recommends that South Africa considers the direct election of a state president. The recommendation states that this is to eliminate unfettered access to power in the way he believes was the case with former President Jacob Zuma. But this couldn't have come at a worse time for a country grappling with electoral reforms and volatile political environment. Joining us now to give insight on this is Masterson, Head of Governance Programs at the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa. Grant, good evening, and thank you very much for your time. This could not have come at a more worse time with polarized views around the electorate in the country, around the electoral reforms and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a lot of stress currently on the system, is there not?
There absolutely is. Starting with the fact that after the last elections, there were a number of complaints by political parties in particular about the way in which the IEC handled the election. And then the elections themselves, were very close. And now we have quite a complicated electoral amendment process that has stalled in Parliament. They had to ask for a 6-month extension from the Constitutional Court, which they've just been granted. And the IEC is suggesting that this is pushing timeframes very close to the 2024 elections. There's a lot going on with regards to our electoral system right now. And so a suggestion like the one that Judge President Zondo has made here to change the system further is certainly adding complications, as you said.
The presidential system, where is it currently being applied and how is it working there?
Well, there are a number of countries that use the direct presidential election system. Many countries in Africa, in fact, and the presidential system really emanates more from sort of the French model than it does from perhaps other models that we might be familiar with, like in the United States or in Britain, which have really got sort of a separation of powers type of governance structure. The French president is a very, very powerful figure. He has huge and sweeping powers in his country, and so really the best model that I could imagine that we're talking about when we're looking about direct elections is the French model, but that model has been applied across the continent of Africa in many countries, and so there's many examples of countries in Africa like Tanzania, Uganda, Zambia, Zimbabwe that we can look at for examples of how you directly elect the president and what the president can do under such circumstances.
Yeah. If it is to work and if it is to work well, what needs to be in place? And therefore, what's the thinking of the Chief Justice? What's his rationale for this recommendation?
Well, I think that the rationale, as I can understand it, based on the section within which the recommendation emanates, is that because President Zuma was found to be behaving in a way that did not uphold the Constitution, the ANC voter was given somehow a sort of a horrible choice. They should either not vote for the party that they want to vote for, which was the African National Congress, or they should be forced to accept the African National Congress presidential candidate that was Jacob Zuma. And this really, I think, confused me when I tried to unpack the logic of this idea, because Zondo is suggesting that if the ANC voter had had the chance in 2014 to vote directly for president, then perhaps President Zuma may not have been elected. I find that idea far-fetched, and I just don't think there are many examples to support that idea in practice, certainly not in the African continent.
Yeah. How would that work with the current political party system that we have in the country? Would then still same political parties have to then encourage individual candidates within their parties to run for president?
Well, that's the way it typically works, yes. So a particular party will nominate a candidate and say that the individual that we are nominating will be a Thabo, or it will be Grant, and so we are backing this particular candidate as our candidate. And of course, when you directly elect the president, he comes in with a much, much stronger mandate than we currently have. Our president is nominated through Parliament, and so there's a very clear chain of accountability. The Parliament elects the president must account to Parliament. As Zondo himself has highlighted, Parliament has failed in that particular responsibility. But directly electing the president may in fact make the position worse, because the president gains greater powers and greater independent authority. It appears as though Zondo is suggesting that independence could have been independent from the party, but what we see in practice is that this tends to then consolidate and centralize ever greater power in the executive at the expense of our other democratic institutions.
Yeah. I fail to see, though, how would that prevent, for example, a president being at the behest of particular individuals. I mean, if you look at the United States system, for example, those with deep pockets, they lobby harder, and certainly the decisions that the president then makes are more in favor of those groups.
That's right. In fact, the risk grows that you have a sort of an inner circle of supporters around the president who is directly elected. In direct presidential elections, it's much, much harder. The bar is set much higher for Parliament to hold the president account. Certainly, the removal of a president or an impeachment is much, much harder because he's been directly elected by the electorate. So it does even create a situation where the president can kind of almost ignore the layers of accountability that in South Africa we do currently have. I think that the important thing here is that what we need to do is really focus our attention on what the role of Parliament in South Africa should be and what the role of our fifth Parliament under Jacob Zuma was. And Zondo himself was scathing about the role of Parliament in holding the executive and the president to account. As we know, President Zuma survived 8 motions of no confidence. All of these motions were brought by the opposition, and the 9th, which was the first time that the ANC put the motion on the cards, was really what triggered the events that saw Jacob Zuma step down as president. But really, that was after the horse had bolted, and it was like slamming the stable door too late. So really and truly, we need to be also looking at how Parliament failed in its responsibilities. And the reason why it failed, very, very simply, is because of our electoral system. The way in which it works right now is that the party decides whose name goes onto the list of candidates for positions in Parliament. And this gives the central committee, the central leadership of every single political party, this is not just the ANC, very, very significant powers to adjust the list. And the higher up on the list you are, the better your chances of being placed into a position of authority in Parliament. And so this means that the parliamentary individuals do not hold to account the executive, because these are the same people who, in fact, are responsible for them getting their jobs. It's a big, big challenge.
Is there a better way to redress the situation? In other words, a better way to ensure that the president acts in the way that a president is supposed to act? Absolutely.
We need to recover Parliament. Parliament is the people's place. It's the place where the representatives of the people are meant to hold all functions of state accountable. And what we've seen is a complete abdication of that responsibility. Now, the way in which you can adapt the current system without necessarily breaking it is by going back as far as 2003, or many, many recommendations that have been ignored since 2003, since the Van Zyl-Slabbert report, to introduce some type of system which allows more direct democracy at the parliamentary level. That would make a much more significant impact on the levels of accountability that the executive is held to, because those MPs do not owe their place in Parliament to the party, but to the voter directly. So whether it be some sort of mixed member proportional system, which is the current local government model in South Africa, or whether it is some sort of direct constituency model like many other countries have around the world, then there are definitely options there. And these options have been presented to Parliament, and they have time and time again been rejected, because this closed list PR system that we use consolidates power in the party leadership, and that's something that the parties themselves find very convenient.
Yeah. So is that what you're suggesting is the opposite of the closed list aspect of South Africa's proportional representation system?
Exactly, yes. If the voters directly elect, say that you were to divide the Ekurhuleni area into 5 constituencies, then 5 MPs from Ekurhuleni would be directly elected to Parliament. And those 5 MPs would have to go back to their constituency to be re-elected, and they would have to persuade their constituency that they were behaving in Ekurhuleni's best interests. not in the interests of their party leadership. And very often what we've seen, the problem has been that with the party leadership so insulated from accountability, you have the situation that you saw Zondo bemoaning, that Parliament just did not pull the brakes on anything that was going on during the state capture era.
These particular matters are already, I suppose, before Parliament as far as the electoral reform conversation is concerned. Do you think these will be considered, or once again we'll find ourselves almost in a similar situation where we were with Section 25, where really nothing happens after having gone through all these processes?
It's worse than that, because unlike with Section 25, which was a politically led process from within Parliament, this process, the electoral amendment process, has been required by the Constitutional Court. So this process must take place. The fact that it is late is also very concerning, because we are closer and closer to 2024. But this process must be completed before the next elections. Otherwise, Parliament is in breach of a Constitutional Court order. So it's much more serious than even Section 25. And the issue here is that the model that I've been discussing of a direct constituency election has been discussed. It was rejected by the minority of the Ministerial Advisory Committee. 3 members out of the 8 voted for a very, very small change, whereas the majority wanted to look at this particular model that I'm talking about. And the one that Parliament is currently considering is the minority view. And I think that has concerned a lot of people who've been following this process, who are concerned about the delays, who are concerned about the constitutionality of the proposals. And whilst there is ongoing discussion about the amendment, it's almost akin to putting lipstick on a pig, because the underlying changes are so minimal as to make no meaningful difference at this stage to the way in which we allow for independent candidates to be elected in South Africa.
Governor expert there, Grant Masterson, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on and joining us tonight here on In Focus.